our great God and loving Heavenly Father, we ask that as we spend time thinking about your word, that you would deepen not just our knowledge, but our love for you and the Lord Jesus. Thank you for this book of Job, which is so wonderfully complex. Help us in it to really be wowed by who you are. And yeah, at the same time, in the depths of suffering, to be able to know and see that you are there. And we pray this in the Lord Jesus' name. Amen. Just kind of from the notes, did anything kind of stand out or anything kind of make you stop and think? Anything new for you guys in the notes?
Well, it wasn't anything new, but I guess when it talks about Elihu doing his speech, but he wasn't actually mentioned anywhere near the end. Like, so he's sort of his talk was sort of inconsequential, at least according to the text.
There are differences of opinion about Elihu, and it depends on which commentator you look at as to where their attitude is. I have my relationship with Elihu is much more positive. I actually think that he points Job to God, and whereas the three friends talking about Job's sin before he suffered, and they're saying he must have done something to deserve suffering. Elihu is saying, you have suffered. We don't know what that's about. In fact, I've got a couple of ideas for you, but while you've been suffering, I've heard you say these things. And he challenges him on those. So it's what he's seen in what Job has said that he is directing to, rather than having the same argument as the other guys.
I just said that because I like Elihu.
Right.
So when I first learned about Job, it was like with those kind of notes that Elihu was a bit nothing, and that he just summarizes the argument of the other guys. But digging more deeply and looking at other commentaries, I'm more convinced of the other argument. I don't know what the argument for the latest book in
it's most commentaries, like the newer ones, don't take, which is both helpful and unhelpful. They don't take as many stances on things. They'll put out, here are all the different views. Elihu being a summary of friends, Elihu being a spokesperson for God himself. That's a popular one at the moment. Elihu being like a person who rebukes Job in particular aspects. Even when we did it at college last year, we didn't land anywhere on Elihu. We were like, here are the potential options, which is helpful. But what I found when we were doing Job last year at college was this would be helpful if and when you guys use commentaries, is knowing this book particularly has a lot of differences on where people land. Characters in Job, their function. So, for example, Satan is a very hotly debated character in Job. So you have people who profess to be evangelical say that Satan is the accuser, is the dark side of God. So that's a view that's put out there by a pretty popular commentary. You have, he's the accuser, the adversary, which is more the traditional understanding, adversary. What else do you have? I remember that particularly being one of the big ones, the one of like he's the dark side of God. Where
I had not heard that before. Yeah, that's interesting.
So just worth noting that when you get into the commentaries, they're gonna come at this from very different angles, and it's particularly helpful to look at who they interpret the Satan to be. That's a helpful starting point. I'll quickly look, see if I can find the role. What are the main?
Yeah, that's interesting to me. Yeah, because I've really only ever like had that idea that it's the adversary, and that he's one of the sons of the sons of God. So like that's the created angelic host who have a position above humans and more power than humans at this point in time, but the humans are actually created to rule all of creation, and so they are going to be under humans at a future point. And so the accuser is actually one of those beings who's a created being under God's control, under God's authority, but he accuses. And so, you know,
I thought the controversy is going to be that God allows Satan to have sway over Job, or is causing anguish and pain and whatnot, as on purpose, in the sense that, okay, you can do that, just don't kill him.
Yeah. Well, that is the idea, that God actually has ultimate control over all creation, and the accuser being has been allowed by God. And you get this picture all the way through. Job says God did this, and that was the hand of God, but actually it was the accuser and the hand of the accuser, but God actually is sovereign over
God.
Yeah.
So the four main views are: he's an uninvited intruder who's opposed to righteous people and holy God. Second is he's actually a member of the divine court. So when he comes in with the sons, who's just carrying out various responsibilities that God's assigned to him. Third is that he is more of a cynical member of the divine court, who's asking necessary questions about Job's piety. And the last one is he's a literary persona for the dark side of God himself, who has fears about Job's piety. So those are the four main interpretations.
Thing to question God's character,
It
doesn't
does, doesn't it? Yeah.
So yeah, that's probably a place where I would want to go. Yeah,
I don't think that last one has any proper grounds. But just worth knowing that is one of the interpretations in popular commentaries. So worth knowing that when you're reading a commentary, to check, where's this guy? Because that affects how they view God.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
If the deity is this function of God in himself, then that speaks to who God is. So just worth knowing when you dip into commentaries.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm starting with this question, and it goes straight into it. It's potentially a heavy one, but I think it's impossible to read the book of Job and not to kind of think in this area. Yeah. So this would just kind of be a bit of open sharing in terms of sharing however much you feel comfortable sharing or want to share, but just a time of suffering and where you sort of affect your relationship with God.
I always thought that with suffering, it's usually that pushes me more towards God than in the sense that I'm looking for some kind of refuge or some kind of solace in a authentic suffering situation. But I guess was it Sarah? No, who was it that said curse God, or it was his wife? That's his wife. She has the more attitude that God's doing all these things to you, then why don't you just curse him? So but I never get to that point about things. It's more like I look to God as a life raft almost, So I'm probably more into God when I'm suffering than not. Usually when I have a good time, nothing's no problem. I don't think about it as much.
And I agree. I think for me, it was a time when you really had to rely on God because you knew you couldn't, get through a day without it. And so, over that period of suffering, you got to know how trustworthy God was. And I love Job's, like, my ears had heard about you. He knew God from the beginning, and he knew the right thing about God. But by the end, I think, having his eyes been open to God and being dressed by God, then he was able to say, but now my eyes have seen you. It's not just a theology I know, but it's something that now I really can say I trust you, and that is a satisfying answer to suffering. I don't need to understand why.
I had an experience of a long period of infertility, and at the same time I was working in a kids hospital, and so I had lots of moments where I was very angry, like how can you let these people be parents
Yeah.
that abuse their children, don't care for them, and yet not let me, when I would be really good as a parent? And
Mhm.
so, like, I actually did have this
Hmm.
questioning with God and being cross with him for not letting me do what I thought I was going to be good at. And so, yeah, I think, but I wasn't coming to that, like, denying God's sovereignty, but recognizing that you're in control, but I'm not liking what you're doing right now.
Yeah.
And I think I deserve better. And I needed to learn
Or-
that I needed to submit myself to what God was saying was the right thing, not what I thought I would be good at and be able to do. So I think, yeah, but there is a freedom in being able to say to God, I don't like what you're doing. And I think Job did that. Like, he questioned, why are you doing this? I'm an innocent person. I haven't done anything wrong, and yet you've made all this happen. I didn't not trust God, but I was able to be cross with him a lot, or I was cross with him a lot,
So-
and I needed to learn that I could trust him.
Yeah.
So can I ask, because that issue of anger and, you know, the tipping into bitterness,
Yeah,
and that's the stuff, because
yeah.
the
I
reason
think
why
that's
it's made is that friends and neighbours, one of us has passed away, and there was a bitterness over the death of their son, and it's the question of, you know, how can a sovereign God allow these things to happen? And sometimes it is about just shutting up. 7 days for these guys to, it wasn't long enough, obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah, so tapping into that pain, loss and unansweredness.
But I think sometimes the questioning, though, is not necessarily out of anger or bitterness. It's out of, so you've done this, there's got to be something I've got to learn from it, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
You do always think that, like, in the moment, I was bitter. I was angry.
Yeah.
Like, why would you let?
Well, I'm sure
you
that's
know, I was
right.
looking after a
Yeah.
baby that had been abused.
Mm.
I'm like, why would you let this
Yeah,
mother
yeah.
have this baby when they're not looked after? And then I was cross.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, I'm just saying there's another way of questioning as well, which I also think is wrong. You know, like, you know, it's arrogant, I guess, to think that, you know, God is going to explain to you, you know, why he's done this. And, you know, like, yeah. And you have to sometimes work through it until you can get to the point of saying, well, I don't understand, but you're God, you know.
It's a hard, like, line to figure out at what point it's but the fact that you're coming to God with all these emotions and grievances is so good. And when at the same time understanding, when is that crossing the line? Because you get to the end of Job and God says to Job, he rebukes his friends and says, Job has spoken well. But then a few chapters before that, he's just kind of almost put Job in his place. So there are points where it's like,
yeah, who is this that darkens my counsel?
Yeah.
That speaks without knowledge. So at the same time that he says he's spoken rightly of me, he also, there has been a few things that Job said that are not lined up.
Well, and I guess, I mean, I'm sort of picking up on, you know, some of the verses coming out of Isaiah from church today. You know, I am the only true God. So then the question is then, well, you know, as you say, well, what are you then basing your thoughts on? If I'm the only true God, where's your source of information? Because, yeah, it's impaired. It's limited. It's only a wise God. I mean, that's the how did it affect your relationship with God? Yeah, it is that I accept that you are a wise God, but help me understand.
Yeah, and sometimes he, like Job, never knew why. He still didn't get the answers he wanted, but he still was God. he saw
But he
God in a
didn't need
different
them in
way.
the
Yeah.
end.
In the end, it was like, yeah, those things that I was asking are actually not the important questions.
Yeah.
So it then opens the question about who had the insight of the war council that was happening at the front of Job.
Yeah, the
You know,
greater.
where on earth did you come from? You know, where does that, who's provided that insight?
Yeah.
That's a good segue. Lewis.
Is it okay? Yeah, because it's always probably.
Yeah.
We're gonna read Job 1 to 2, 42, just 2 verses. We're a pretty small group. I reckon we could do this all together.
Yeah.
And what we're going to do is the 3 questions. What are the truths that we must maintain as we read Job? What questions does Satan raise in chapters 1 and 2? And you have a question: why does God allow or initiate this? And the point of kind of going through this is Job is massive, and it can feel when you're kind of in the thick of it, it's hard to kind of find your way around it. And so the truths that we must maintain, they're gonna be like stakes in the ground that we've got to hold to, especially when you're going through the speeches of the friends and what they're saying, and you're trying to figure out, hey, what's true, what's not true, and what they're saying. These are the stakes in the ground that we've got to hold. Maybe John, someone
I'm
go
happy
around.
to start. What do I just read until I fall over?
Yes.
Sounds good. All right, we'll try not to kill you. In the land of Uz, there lived a man whose name was Job. This man was blameless and upright. He feared God and shunned evil. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters, and he owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 5,000 yoke of oxen, and 500 donkeys, and had a large number of servants. He was the greatest man among all the people of the East. His sons used to hold feasts in their homes on their birthdays, and they would invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. When the period of feasting had run its course, Job would make arrangements for them to be purified. Early in the morning, he would sacrifice a burnt offering for each of them, thinking, perhaps my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. This was Job's regular custom. One day, the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them. The Lord said to Satan, where have you come from? Satan answered the Lord, from roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth on it. And the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil. Does Job fear God for nothing? Satan replied. Have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? You have blessed the work of his hands, so that his flocks and herds are spread throughout the land. But now stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. The Lord said to Satan, very well then, everything he has in your power, but on the man himself do not lay a finger. Then Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. One day when Job's sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the older brother's house, a messenger came to Job and said, the oxen were ploughing and the donkeys were grazing nearby. And the Sabaeans attacked and made off with them. They put the servants to the sword, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you. While they were still speaking, another messenger came and said, the fire of God fell from the heavens and burned up the sheep, and the servants, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, another messenger came and said, the Chaldeans formed 3 raiding parties and swept down on your camels and made off with them. They put the servants to the sword, and I am the only one left who has escaped to tell you. While he was speaking, yet another messenger came and said, your sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the older brother's house, when suddenly a mighty wind swept in from the desert and struck the 4 corners of the house and collapsed on them, and they are dead. I am the only one who has escaped to tell you. At this, Job got up and tore his robe and shaved his head. Then he fell to the ground in worship and said, Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised. In all this, Job did not sin, charging God with wrongdoing.
Okay, so on another day, the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them to present himself before him. And the Lord said to Satan, Where have you come from? Satan answered the Lord, From roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth on it. And the Lord said to Satan, Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil. And he still maintains his integrity, though you incited me against him to ruin him without reason. Skin for skin, Satan replied. A man will give all he has for his own life. But now stretch out your hand and strike his flesh and bones, and he will surely curse you to your face. The Lord said to Satan, Very well then, he is in your hands, but you must spare his life. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and afflicted Job with painful sores from the soles of his feet to the crown of his head. Then Job took a piece of broken pottery and scraped himself with it as he sat among the ashes. His wife said to him, Are you still maintaining your integrity? Curse God and die. He replied, You are talking like a foolish woman. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble? In all this, Job did not sin in what he said. When Job's three friends, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite, heard about all the troubles that had come upon him, they set out from their homes and met together by agreement to go and sympathize with him and comfort him. When they saw him from a distance, they could hardly recognize him. They began to weep aloud, and they tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads. Then they sat on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights. No one said a word to him, because they saw how great his suffering was.
Oh, there.
Do we give
Um,
him any credit points?
Well, I think it was really commendable for friends to spend time with him.
Yeah,
They're actually there to
absolutely.
support him.
Yeah, allegedly.
So is that something that he really wanted them to come? I mean,
But
that's.
he probably didn't want him, them telling him what his problems were, you know. And just being there and commiserating with him, I think it was very convenient.
I like the fact that they then decided to rip their own clothes.
Well,
Yeah. After the Lord had spoken these words to Job, the Lord said to Eliphaz the Temanite, My anger burns against you and against your 2 friends, for you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has. Now therefore take 7 bulls and 7 rams and go to my servant Job and offer up a burnt offering for yourselves. And my servant Job shall pray for you, for I will accept his prayer, not to deal with you according to your folly. For you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has. So Eliphaz the Temanite and Bildad the Shuhite and Zophar the Naamathite went and did what the Lord had told them, and the Lord accepted Job's prayer. Do you want me to keep reading to the end?
No, that's good. Yeah, thank you. So what kind of from those, this is kind of the lens through which we'll be reading Job. What are the truths that we have to kind of maintain, even in the thick of the weeds in Job?
The God's in charge.
And everybody, except for Job's wife, acknowledges that.
Well, yeah.
She doesn't know
No, she
it.
acknowledges
Yeah.
that God is in control because she says he's the one that's done all
Yes,
this.
yeah. Just curse him and die. You know?
I am, I'm not trying to be a male chauvinist of anything, because they've got 3 of them, they're coming onto the scene very quickly. They've got their own issues, but she's an interesting character, and yeah, I'm still trying to get my head around It's out of frustration. I think a lot of
It's the loss of everything.
Absolutely.
Yes, and she's watching him suffer, you know, in
Yeah.
his body, and just says, you know, put your misery over with, just get
Yeah.
it done.
Yeah, sometimes when you see someone
Yeah.
suffering,
It's
and you are suffering, like, because you know that she's shared in the same suffering, except for the illness part, and so she's, she must be just beside herself. Like, I mean, I can't imagine.
Well, which sort of
Yeah.
comes to one of the truths, and I think it's the fact that Job's wife appears on the scene and then seems to disappear from the story. So the truths are you get very little information.
Yeah, there's
about-
not enough information
about
about
her.
really.
And you're absolutely right. She's the one suffering. She's lost her family.
Yeah. And Job doesn't actually say to her, "You are foolish."
Yeah.
And you are wrong. He actually just says you're speaking like someone who's foolish. And so it's almost like he's warning her, hey, be careful.
Yeah.
Be careful what
Yeah.
you're saying.
yeah.
So yeah, and yeah, I think, I mean, it doesn't say at the end that he's got a different life. I think, you know.
Where those kids came from.
Everything
Yeah.
back, but yeah,
He does get everything back. So no,
but not necessarily a new wife.
yeah, it doesn't say.
We've got control, like God's in control. That's we have to maintain that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's very clear in that passage that 3 times Job is blameless. Like, he is a righteous man. He hasn't actually done a heinous sin that would cause God to be angry with him. So
And he realizes that too, he hasn't done it, but even
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
he still says it's, well, it's something God, he can do what he wants.
yeah, and he has a understanding that sacrifice is what takes away sin, and so he is in this understanding that if I'm done all this, then actually my sin has been atoned. It should be atoned for. Later on, he questions, why haven't you forgiven me my sin when I've done all the process for that? And so I think that he has at least trusted in the idea that atonement for sin can be made. So yeah, he's considered righteous. He's considered blameless.
Because the time period for Job is the same time around Abraham, isn't it?
Well,
And so therefore, where's the covenant issue that God makes with Abraham fit in the scheme of?
well, it's tricky because it seems like Job is not part of the covenant people.
Yeah, that's right.
But he's a righteous man
Yeah,
that honors God. So it's almost like you've got this, you know, people coming from the flood and spread over the earth. And there's a few around that actually have maintained the knowledge of God and the right way to do things. Melchizedek.
I was going to say,
And Job. They're 2 examples of people outside the line of promise that's not been traced, but that actually maintain the knowledge of God.
So Job is not the time of Abraham. He just says,
at the beginning in the blue.
No, the name.
It says, the best man of his day probably lived during the time of Abraham.
Well, it says,
yeah.
If you look at verse 5,
In chapter 1.
in chapter 1, it's really interesting. He's the one who offers the burnt offering. So this is pre-priesthood.
priesthood, yes.
So that's one
So
of the
that
suggestions. Yeah.
Point
Okay.
and also the names of his friends. One of them is the Temanite from Teman, and his name is Eliphaz. And if you look at some of the genealogies in Genesis, Eliphaz is around the time, like he's a son of Esau.
Yeah.
Or a grandson of Esau. So that places Job in that time frame. Before the journey to Egypt, but around like just maybe a little bit after the time of Abraham.
So do we think there was a real Job?
That's another thing that's debated, isn't it?
There's so many commentaries that no, he's just a mythical story that is a life lesson for you.
An allegory.
I think it has to be real because James chapter 5 refers to him as a real person.
Yeah, and there's also another Old Testament book that that lists Job
as a
alongside other like characters like Daniel and
Oh yeah.
as a righteous person. I've got it written down somewhere. Anyway, there is another section in the Old Testament. Ezekiel, there you go. Ezekiel talks about Job and places him in a lineup with known people who have actually lived. And so it kind of makes it,
then it really
go to
makes,
less as a mythical made up person that is to embody a suffering person than actually, he did.
So the little scenario at the beginning with God and Satan, if, you know, like, I mean, that's got to be sort of somebody's idea of what went on, you know, like the writers.
Or, you know, someone's inspired by the Holy Spirit's understanding of.
And that's just the way they encapsulated this story of this ruptured man.
And maybe Job himself
had
a revelation eventually and put it together, or you know, it's really difficult to know because obviously there's been a tradition of oral tradition that these poems are all been kind of handed down, but someone has edited them and put them together and made it into this structure that is really precise and balanced. So
is that Cuban?
So there's been some kind of editing. But obviously, you know, people, it could have been Solomon, it could have been Joseph, it could have been you know, like Joseph was in prison for a long time. Maybe he thought, oh, while I'm here, maybe I'll put some some embellishment on this story that I know because I'm suffering too, and when you helps make sense of my own suffering if I'm thinking about this.
But when you're reading the notes, it kind of says this is sort of like a counterbalance to Proverbs, where, you know, this happens, but this is the natural, you know, thing. But this is a counterbalance that happened then before the Proverbs actually were written, you know. So just
kind of get this idea that from Abraham. So thinking maybe Eliphaz is Esau's descendant. They've had teaching from Abraham, but Esau didn't continue on that line of promise. And he went his own way and then obviously developed his own ideas about God and right and wrong. And so you see that reflected in his understanding that God is real, he's sovereign, and he punishes evil. So he's got all of that, but there is not the nuance so it's almost like you can see how different ways of philosophy, when you distance yourself from the true line of promise and God's authoritative word, you skew.
Yes. Which then is highlighted in the three guys.
Yeah. So Eliphaz, who is this descendant of possible descendant of Esau, he does have an understanding of God. But it's not a right understanding according to what God says at the end.
Those are good questions you raised there. How you solve them can lead to particular troubling paths. So, for example, some commentaries will go, how does these people have access to this divine scene? Must be because it's just a made up story that is to speak to the general idea of suffering. But if you kind of trace where that goes, if Job is a made up character and suffering is not real, then you can bring into question God's response to him as
Mm.
more just like a
Is that a made up
generalized
response? Yeah.
a made up response, a generalized response. God doesn't actually get the suffering that Job goes through because he's not a real character.
Mm.
But then, I mean, it then limits what is also referenced elsewhere, which Paul talks about meeting a person who looked in the heavens and the higher stuff, and it's like, oh, okay, I don't understand all this, but it's almost like saying, you're telling us that God can't do this with people, that he reveals things in ways that are more precise. I mean, Daniel, if you can make sense of some of Daniel's dreams, tell me about it. But, so it is that sense of, you know, because we don't experience it, therefore it can't possibly have existed, and hence that. And I've heard, you know, a few people talk about, you know, the Bible's just an allegory of X, Y, and Z. I think, well, no, hold on, when do you actually, you know, drop the point and say, no, this is a factual account of what took place. Now, I know Job is complex, but
I feel like we need to identify him as a person that did go through this suffering and did work through all of the issues that are worked through in the book, in the book, and that he is an example of
and God has
real suffering of someone who actually didn't deserve it in the way that those people thought, like that immediate retribution idea.
I'll keep things moving.
Keep things moving. Because it's 1:45.
Good discussions. Job is just one of those books you can keep talking about. What I was trying to get at with the questions that Satan raises is the idea that he questions Job's devotion, but actually, as he does that, he's actually also questioning God in the sense of, oh, Job's only doing this because you give him all this stuff. And God, you're only giving him this stuff to buy his devotions. So it's kind of a twofold accusation there. And with the question of why does God allow and initiate this, this actually came out of the Wilson commentary, which I'll show at the end of the slides. But there's often like a reading, like an interpretation that chapters 1 and 2 give you the reason as to why God does this. But I don't think it actually does. You kind of get a sense that God's unquestionably in control. Satan can only do what God says he's allowed to do. But when you kind of press into the question of why is God letting this happen? Doesn't God know that Job is blameless? Why test him? He already knows this. And that's led, again, commentators. So there's 3 that I've picked out. One, God doesn't know the outcome, which we've already said, no, God's in control. Another one, God is prepared to allow the Satan to satisfy himself, or God accepts that it's a challenge to vindicate Job.
Christopher Ashe also has a different take in that he actually highlights this one person, because it's God that says, have you seen my servant? So that he will be glorified in the response of Job. So there's,
But we do need it, don't we? I mean, otherwise we'd be thinking every time something bad happens, oh, we've done something wrong, you know. But we need this example to know that sometimes it just happens that we won't understand why. And if the Bible didn't give it to us, then we would.
We'd be in that. We'd be in the pattern of Proverbs. Proverbs is like a little you do it and then it happens. It's a how-to. So if I do good, then and do all the things that I should do to be right with God, like the sacrificial system, then I shouldn't suffer.
And so if I suffer, I've done something wrong, you know.
And I mustn't have got it right
God,
with my
God
sacrifice.
isn't in control, or God isn't just, you know. It's just,
I mean, it's obviously a template for Christ. Bad things happen to good people. So that's the.
And I mean, big picture. You can see that Job's like the type of Jesus, because he was a great suffered greatly, and then was restored. So it's this.
Sorry, can I just say one thing as well? Is that the other thing I notice is that it really brings to the fore the character of Satan. He's a sniper, he's always a schemer,
Accuser.
Accuser, and you can't trust him to do anything that's good.
Yeah, and it's like
the control of God, isn't he?
Yeah.
He delights in doing what he does.
Sometimes wasn't even his idea, like that inciting idea. It did come from God, you know, like I've been wandering around. Have you seen Job? You know, it's kind of like
Which
he's not in control.
Yeah, except you get this picture of, and it's clearer in the version that you read than in the NIV. Behold, all that he has, Satan says, stretch out your hand. And then God says, okay, all that he has is in your hand. And so there's this.
He's only in your hand to this point.
Yeah, and
so,
you can only do
know,
up to this amount.
Yeah.
So it's, and then Job says it's the hand of God.
So
So there's this big picture of whose hand is it?
Yeah.
But is it the parallel too, though, that Job's life wasn't taken from him, but Jesus was?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it does point in that direction.
Yeah, we won't have time to go through all the questions. There's one particular one near the end that I think would be really helpful because it's gonna get us to practice thinking about the theology of Job in a practical situation. So we'll get there. I'll try and summarize this stuff. So we've kind of been touching on this, the kind of black and whiteness that the friends have in terms of their theology, which is a theology of divine retribution. You do something wrong, you receive God's punishment. That's kind of the gist of it, and it's based in God's just, and so everything he does is just. If you're suffering, therefore it's because you've done something wrong. God is punishing you for that. But here's where they go wrong. 3 particular ways. Their friends, they overestimate how much truth they know. So they think, I can't see what's in front of me, but I can assume because these things are happening, therefore I know that you've done something wrong. So they overestimate how much truth they know. They misapply the truth that they do know, which is like the retribution theology. And that's kind of the, if you sin, you suffer, and therefore if you suffer, then you sinned, which is not actually reversible.
Not,
and then 3, even when Job keeps telling them, I've done nothing wrong, I'm pleading my case before God, because of the first 2, they've actually closed their mind to any truth that actually might be new to them. So that's kind of the 3 summaries of where the friends go wrong.
But they're well-meaning friends, though.
That's quite, yeah.
The sound of
but
music.
at the end, like you get this picture that they descend to accusing, and so it's almost like they're instruments of the accuser, and so like these friends become accusers. So there's this pattern of, well, the accuser accuses, but then these friends become accusers.
And again, this is kind of what we've been talking about, but understanding that when things are happening for us, we don't have all the answers, and it can be, depending on kind of where you stand, it can be quite easy to jump to spiritual explanation. So for example, I know for my dad, he when something goes wrong, he will immediately jump to the you've done something. This is clearly a sign that you've done something wrong. But we see in Job, that's not always the case. It might be, but we don't. Yeah, it might be, but to be certain, you probably can't be that certain on that. So suffering is more complex than just this has happened, therefore you've done this. I do want to get to the last question because I think that's going to really put us to think about where the Yahweh's response section is really thinking about where Job does across the line in terms of when he questions and accuses God. And when he does that, what he's saying is, God, I can run the universe better than you can. And so God's response is, do you know all these things that I like, that I am in control of? Is God putting him back in his place? But this is the question I really want to get to, and we discuss it for the rest of our time together. I'll read it out first. One of your church friends makes the following remarks about during a severe bout of illness. I just don't understand what God's playing at. When I cry out to him, it's as if he's hiding from me. Day after day, everything goes from bad to worse. Even if I could get God's attention, he probably wouldn't listen. How can this possibly be fair? Indeed, how's anything fair? Just look at the world we live in. All these stupid wars, all these deadly diseases, everyone dies, good and bad alike. Why does God allow that? Why doesn't he care? Isn't he responsible? Or is he just like us? Is he a bit short-sighted? Is he too busy with his own interests? Maybe he's not such a good God after all. Why did he let me be born at all? Does he get some kind of pleasure watching me suffer? We should just really let me die. And
Is that a question?
so,
How would you going to respond?
so this is thinking about that. Like, if you need me to put it back up, I'll switch it back. But I think just for the rest of our time thinking, first of all, are we dealing with someone who has faith? Do you reckon? And thinking about you personally, how would you have reacted? And then, given what we've thought about in Job, what do you reckon would be an appropriate response? And the ones in italics, they're just examples, just to kind of get you thinking, but you don't have to.
It seems to reflect more like his wife's attitude, you know, instead of Job's attitude. Whereas, so I wouldn't. And he's asking, are you dealing with a person of faith? I said, well, it's this person's faith is sorely tested. But with Job, he never lost his faith. But his wife may have said, he wanted to keep the faith. What did you say, cursing God?
Yeah, although Job does say all those things.
Yes, yeah. Right.
So if you look at what those things that are said there,
But
Job actually says all of those.
But he says that God's always in control. He didn't mess that.
Yeah, but you don't necessarily we get that that's the case, but when he says it,
Well, he feels God's doing it to him.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that there is an element that if you want to argue with God, then there is a background there that actually he's the one I need to argue with, because there's nowhere else that makes sense to take this. So even if someone isn't a believer and they like blaming God for their suffering, actually there's something in that.
Yeah.
And so they might not be a believer, but if they're saying, if there's a God and he, so like they're actually going, it highlights the fact that actually they are being driven to think about these things in a way that they hadn't before. And maybe it will point them to the fact that actually, well, God might be in control, and if he is and he's letting you go through this, then what does it say about God? And are the conclusions that you're drawing that he's not powerful, that he's not good, are they right conclusions? But at least there's something there that's going, actually, it's God I need to have a contention with.
And maybe it's helpful to sort of take a person to other places in the Bible where people have done exactly that. Some of the Psalms are just so, saying the same kind of things, questioning God and, like really lamenting over the fact that he doesn't seem to be there anymore, that sort of thing. Yeah. Yes, I mean, sometimes someone's not going to listen to you saying, just like the friends, well, God is all these things when they're not seeing it.
And potentially with the, are you dealing with a person of faith? Maybe a bit of a trick question, given what we looked at with the friends. Don't know. Like, you could be, but could you potentially be saying that you have more information on this, like about this person, than you actually do? And so you could be charitable and say, maybe, this is how they're reaching out to God in this way at this time.
I think that is a person of faith, actually.
Well, otherwise,
because they're God, they see God as being the one who's, they reflect this on him, but they still don't understand why. But still says God's in control according to him when he's talking, even though he doesn't like it or he doesn't feel it's great.
Or at least considers the fact that maybe God is behind it, and so therefore we need to take it to
That
God.
makes that's the thing. So
Yeah.
And then, how often do you just sort of generalize out to everything else, like all the wars and the diseases and the earthquakes that
Yeah, you only have to look around at the world and you can see that there's something wrong.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make sense because bad people seem to have the upper hand, or you see people get away with things and they don't get justice. So it's not a wrong thing to note that things aren't right with the world.
So is the central question then, why does God allow that or allow this? Is that the central issue? God, if there's an acknowledgement that maybe God does exist for a non-believer, then is the central question, why does he allow these things to occur?
And it's a question that Job doesn't answer.
And there's the one question that which Job asks at the beginning and doesn't get answered. So yeah.
That's the big problem of evil question, that like this is one of the why does God allow unjust suffering? And I think I read an article on it and was chatting with people at college, and I think the best response I've heard has been the humility of, you can't name and you don't know the specifics of why, and so it would be hurtful of you to be able to deem why God has done something. But when you look at the cross and you see the ultimate unjust suffering of the Lord Jesus, you can say with absolute certainty from that God is absolutely against evil and against unjust suffering and will do something about it. And so that's been the most helpful response I've heard. I don't know, but I know that God is against it and is working to bring it under the Lord Jesus.
Yeah. And we can also say we don't know why God takes his time about it. But there is going to be a day where he is going to bring justice, complete justice. So when someone is struggling with God's justice, if we lift their eyes to see Jesus and that promise that justice is going to be served, we just don't have a time frame for when that's going to happen, but it is going to happen. That's a promise from a powerful God.
It's interesting though, because you don't get justice with Satan from Job's book.
No.
You just get this outcome.
Except that
an unknown chapter.
that you get this picture that he can't go beyond where God set.
That's right. It's linked second.
And Leviathan is held by a hook, and so God has him controlled. And yes, he's furiously unleashing his anger and fury against people, but he can't actually do any more than what God allows him to do. And I feel like that actually gives you hope.
Like to some people,
that, how much worse could it be if God wasn't actually stopping evil from happening? He is containing it. If he wasn't, it would be chaos. Like he is a God of good and order, and the fact that everything hasn't turned completely to chaos is a testimony to the fact that God is holding things.
So I would probably, say that this type of conversation would happen over many times.
Yeah.
On one sitting.
Yeah.
Unless you've got someone who's got a prepared heart.
And when someone is in that type of
Rage.
Well, it's a rage, but it's also like a depression. Like they can't see outside themselves, and Job couldn't see outside himself for a long time. It took 40 chapters for him to actually be able to look up. And so like I think that we need to remember that it takes time and a lot of patience in waiting. Elihu doesn't speak till like long after Job is like, and then he challenges him and Job doesn't answer. So
it was also God intervened though, didn't he? I mean, like I think that part of Job's thing was he got to know God in such a way that he hadn't before. And so he was satisfied with not understanding why, I remember when I was sort of going through this and like at 11 months after my husband died, someone just at a barbecue said, well, the only answer to suffering is to trust God. And suddenly everything fell in place, but if you'd have said that, 6 months earlier, I wouldn't have even heard it. But by then it was, oh, this is a relief. I don't have to understand, I know how good God is now because I have learned it over this time. And now I can just say, okay, I'm so glad. I need to know.
There are things that Job says in the middle of his suffering that are truths. And the way that his expressed hope grows, like he starts by saying, oh, I wish there was an arbiter. And then he kind of says, but there is an arbiter. I wish that I could be like a tree that dies and then comes back. But then he says, I will stand before God in this flesh and see. So he goes from questioning to real like sure statements that I am gonna see God. So he in his suffering he actually starts progressing to an understanding of God that that you don't.
Is that sort of him also leaving the experience of what's happened, not necessarily behind, but I guess what I'm trying to say is there's a feeling aspect and then there's an insight aspect. And he's gone through that grieving or experience stage and is now starting to sort of come back to the to the concrete truths about who God is.
Maybe, but maybe it's going through those things that made him think about, okay, what is it, the foundation, what is it that I really wish for? Actually, I think that's right. But also I think, there is this inward looking to upward looking. And the friends are like outward looking. Like they look at what's happening. They're not looking necessarily at who God is.
Which is the concrete knowledge of who he is. Same today as he was.
They're just looking at their experience of the world and their understanding of how they think it ought to work.
And life should be good.
And life should be good if you do all the right things. So I think that maybe it's sitting with someone during that inward focus, because that is inevitable. Like when you're suffering and in pain, it's really hard to look out or look up. And so you need people around you that are looking up to walk with you. And then there's going to be a time where you're going to be ready to look up. And then that's where we need to lift their gaze and go, you know what? Yeah, this has been really hard. But don't forget that God's made promises that are really good.
I think one of the hard things is being attentive to people in that and kind of being able to understand when to say something.
Yeah, and it is really hard because you don't want to push people through their grief, because grieving is a process. And as you said, you can't necessarily hear what people are saying in that.
God, and I think you're overestimating people. I just think God can do it without, he uses different people, but if you just see it as God, it's him you get to know. And you know, like little things like a flower coming out in a garden when you're feeling down, and you know, things that you never attributed to God before, you see from the hand of God when you really are depending upon him, and he brings you to the point. I don't know. I mean, he uses people.
Yeah.
I feel like it's got to be you.
No,
right
but I
first,
think,
you know?
yeah, that's right. But at the same time, we need to be walking with people like they need someone next to them saying, I'm here with you.
Yeah.
I am trusting in God. I know that you feel like he's far away, but I'm here with you.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Like
in a way, we need to be physically, like when they feel distant from God and that maybe they don't feel like they're hitting a wall when they talk to him, say, well, I'm here. I'm here with you. I will pray with you. Yeah, I don't know.
I didn't put this kind of scenario together that we leave with concrete. This is a 10-step.
No, there isn't.
Yeah, but understanding the complexity of it, and I think part of it is also, when we look at how the friends respond, is to take a step back and remember you don't have all the answers. To look to the cross to see how God Himself is responding to it, but then also for us to be ready. I think what I've learned in just when I'm walking with people has been being ready to apologize for when I've misspoken and say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I shouldn't." I pushed that too soon.
Yes, sometimes we want to just say, Romans 8, God works together for good. And at the time, I know that, but you don't need to remind me of that right now because I'm not feeling.
So, I mean, and I have come across brothers and sisters who've talked about that period in the wilderness, as they would talk about, they don't feel God. Maybe the wilderness is not the right reference there because, it's more that that lack of connection that they used to feel that they don't feel now. And it's a dark time for them in the sense of not feeling connected. And it's that feeling aspect, but
I think also, isn't there remind them that actually you might not feel close to God, but He actually hasn't left you. He said He's going to be with you, and while you're feeling while you're feeling distant, God hasn't left you. And I think that's with God. In Job, you see, actually, God hasn't gone far. God's right there. But He doesn't actually connect with Job till right at the end. But God hasn't left him. Job feels like he has, but God hasn't. And I think we need to keep reminding people, you might feel a long way from God, but He's not far. And just hold on.
I've seen that poster.
Oh, the cat kind of stuff.
Footsteps in the boots and stuff.
I don't know if I'd say it's to the person while they're in it or just depending on where they are, but I think we often have the tendency of thinking we sense God only at work depending on how we're feeling towards Him or depending on how often we've opened up our scriptures. But God's work isn't
it's not dependent on us.
It's not dependent on how we're feeling. We could be working through that, and even when our Bibles are closed, not that that's a good thing, but God still uses that to do what He does with us.
Yeah, and I agree with that, but God also likes being personal with us. And being personal, the way I'm personal with God is not the same with anyone else. And He knows that. And that's where, I guess, the sensitivity, as we talk about with those that are struggling with this stuff, it's almost like trying to understand how they operate in order to know as to how to adequately.
And I think that's where the lament literature actually helps. And so, you use Job chapter 3, you use Psalm 8, 9, like those places in the Bible, Lamentations, where people are groaning and crying out, you can take them there and go, let's groan and cry out together. God feels far away in these passages.
Yeah.
And so it's okay to lament the fact that I'm feeling distant. And as you use those words, which we'll talk about later when we get to Lamentations, that actually gives you a voice to express all these feelings, but in a way that isn't being, and like, it's true lament, but in a way that God wants you to lament, rather than being defiant and proud, and like, it teaches you humility.
And how to go about things.
Yeah, and so I think it's something that we are not good at. We don't sing many songs in church that are about those lament ideas. Whereas in the calendar of the Jewish tradition, there were times where you just did the laments.
By the rivers of Babylon, is that what comes to mind?
Yeah, like, but they, every year they have this time of lament, which I think this is a season now, like they lament the fall of the temple, like all of those things, like the fall of the temple in the exile, but then also at the same time the fall of the temple in the Roman times, and like they have a time of lament. Like you go to the wall in Jerusalem and people are lamenting in front of the temple. So there is a lament that helps focus. Yeah, and I think if we're expressing our lament in a way that God shows us how, then that takes that inward looking to upward looking.
Which then leads us to obviously of wisdom.
Yeah.
Which is, being wise in your lament.
Yeah. And so I think that in the wisdom literature, or in the writings, we have this suffering, but then it teaches us how to lament, which then takes our gaze up from the inward to the upward. And so I think it's through that lament that we can help people change their.
So does that then shed more light on Jesus in the garden, lamenting over his imminent death and sweating blood because of the passion? Passion's not the right word, but that reflection, that reflection of what's about to face, or he's going through the anguish. And I had to draw all those connections. Thank you.
I'll read out this a little bit to finish our time off. But this is kind of like the first couple of sentences. John Calvin on his commentary on Job. He says, "The better to profit ourselves by that which is contained in this present book. First and foremost, it behoves us to understand some of it. For the story here written shows us how we'll be in God's hand, and that it lies in him to determine our life, and to dispose of the same accord to his good pleasure, and that is our duty to submit ourselves to him with all humbleness and obedience."
Pack his style.
He's basically saying we're in God's hands.
Mm.
And he works out his will according to his pleasure. Our job is to submit to him.
Our job is not
Yeah.
small.
So I think there's this idea in Job, and Job, in his anguish and where he goes, but there's an arrogance about, I think I could do better with the world, and this idea that we need to be humble before God, which is a place where he gets to humility, and I repent in dust and ashes. I've spoken out of turn, and I need to keep my mouth shut. So this idea that God is God and we're not. And so we need to approach him. And the wisdom is to fear God. So there's this link with wisdom. Yeah.
These are two particular commentaries. There's Barry's one that came out 2 years ago. And,
Oh,
he
okay.
wrote the materials on this.
Yeah, is it the same as what he's got in the materials, or is it because he changes his mind?
Yes.
I'm interested to know.
This is written quite a lot. The PDC notes are quite a long time ago, so it'd be interesting to see how much he's changed. This is
Yeah.
the one that's recommended by a college at the moment as a great evangelical commentary on Job.
That's Australian guy, is he, or not?
I don't think so.
Oh, okay.
But both of these are not going to be people that suggest that the Satan's the dark side of God.
No, that's right.
But yes, worth noting that there's, as we
Yeah.
mentioned earlier, there's a lot of interesting interpretations.
Yeah.
Of that.
And
That God is both good and evil. Is that the?
Oh, you went here for, oh, yeah,
Isn't that an interesting concept?
yeah.
And it doesn't surprise me. People will write whatever they can get away with and sell something.
yeah.
That's just like, well, we just stopped the record.